So my name is Jonathan Brill. I'm a business futurist. Most of what I do is I help organizations, nation states, leaders who are dealing with complexity make better decisions about the next 5 years. Where will they need to compete? The next three, where do we need to be positioned to compete at that time? And then the next year, where do we need to invest? And my work started about 25 years ago in an odd place in this water off the coast of Thailand. And I was right up there by that rock. It was in the water, and all of a sudden the waves started getting bigger, and they started getting bigger. And as they did, I heard people calling out from the shore saying, "Come back in." And as I tried to swim, the water, the Gulf of Thailand, started pulling me out to sea. And the harder I swam, the harder I got pulled out to sea. And I was in a moment where I had maybe a minute of energy left, and I had to make a decision. Am I going to continue doing what's already worked, trying to fight the forces of nature, or always work to fight the forces of nature, try and swim back in, or am I going to try and do anything different? And in that moment is when about 90% of beach deaths occur. People get adrenalized, they get exhausted, they try and fight the forces of nature, and then they drown. In that moment, I did something I hadn't expected, something that saved my life, something I hadn't been trained to do yet, which is I stopped, I took a breath, I thought about the few things that I might know about the situation. And I remembered back to my first grade swim teacher who taught me about these things called riptides. In a normal tide, the water goes into the shore and it goes out, and it goes in and it goes out. But in a riptide, something different happens, which is it goes around the beach, and then it comes back out through a channel. And the way that you know this is that there's a clear water where the water is going out, and white caps where it's going in. And I looked around, and sure enough, there's some flotsam over here, some jetsam over there. And I made a decision, which is I was going to take my last little bit of energy and swim about 30 feet, not toward the shore, but across it. And all of a sudden, what happened is that the water, instead of pulling me out to sea, trying to kill me, changed what it was doing and started pushing me into shore and floating me in when I didn't have enough energy left to think about, to take advantage of the situation. The same Gulf of Thailand that was trying to kill me saved my life. And as I was crawling up the beach, I started thinking. I got myself an ice cold beer, or in this case, water. I started to watch the sunset. I started thinking about the question that I've been kind of focused on for the last 25 years, which is what the hell just happened? How did the same forces of nature that were trying to kill me save my life? How did I start working with forces that were bigger than me and change my outcomes? And what else can we do in our lives and in our businesses and in our governments to have those same results? How can we shift? How can we create leverage around macro forces that change our outcomes? Because it turns out in business, in life, most black swans, most incalculable events actually aren't. They're much more knowable than we often imagine. They're what we call rogue waves. They're the result of individually manageable waves of change colliding at a specific time and place, focusing in ways that become unmanageable. In the deep ocean, we have not riptides, we have what are called rogue waves. When undercurrents collide, a 120-foot tall wall of water can pop up out of nowhere. I think the same thing happens in business. I think the same thing happens in our lives. I suspect that something like this might be happening to you right now. And so, how can we turn these disruptions into opportunities in almost everything we do? In business, it turns out that there were major business shocks about 4 times a year in the 20th century. About every 7 years, Several of those would collide, and you would get a world war, you get an economic shock, you get a major disaster. And we spent three, 3.5 years digging out of them. In fact, in the 20th century, we spent about 45% of our time as managers digging out of rogue waves. As the world becomes more disruptive, as the world becomes more chaotic, the number of rogue waves are going to increase, which leads to this interesting question, which is, do you manage assuming that the future will be what you expect, or do you manage assuming that it won't? What we've seen in the world after COVID is this belief that we can't predict the future. We can't know the future. Therefore, we can't plan. But the thing is, before COVID, what people would tell me is, oh, we know the future, so we don't need to have a plan. My point is that the bigger issue here is an emotional one about how do we interact with the future? How do we move from a world where we're just protecting value from disruption, trying to mitigate disruption, to leaning into it, to growing it? Because if this moves from being 45% of our time is in rogue waves to the majority of our time is in rogue waves, that has to be our operating strategy, that we are going to figure out how to dig out of these, and that is where we're going to find a growth. And the way you do this is by asking three questions. Why is the world changing? What can we do about it? And how do we take action? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's act like Simon Sinek and start with why. When you take a look at what's going on in Iran, when you take a look at what's going on around the world, it's terrifying. Until you step back and you understand what all of these resource conflicts and these power conflicts are really about. And they're about a foundational insight, which is in 1800, the average income around the world was $350 a year. You go out to today, that's $500, $600, $7,500 a year, depending on who calculates it. But we're seeing a massive growth in wealth around the world. You move out another 25, 30 years, and all of a sudden it looks like this. A massive proportion of the planet living in the US level middle class today. And when you take someone out of rural poverty, when you take someone out of that world in the 1800s, and you put them into the world that all of us live in, your resource uses go up by 30 to 40 times. And the foundational question is, where are the hydrocarbons going to come from? Right? Where is the energy going to come from? Where is the water going to come from? Where is the steel going to come from? Who's going to do the work, the backbreaking work? And this is the conversation that we are in right now. It is a conversation about human potential, how much more we can do as a species than ever before. And the question is, how are we going to do it peacefully? How are we going to do it peaceably as we move forward? How are we going to share, distribute these resources? And at the end of the day, this is a conversation about innovation. How are we going to do things dramatically more effectively, more efficiently, so that more people can live a better life than ever before? The level to which we get this right, the level to which we get this wrong, is the level to which we live in a Star Trek future or a Blade Runner future, or we'll get to this one after drinks. There's so much potential here, but the future is not a result of things that are bigger than us. It's the result of the choices we make in our businesses and our lives. Today, there are more trillion-dollar crises than ever, and they're all colliding at the same time. We can see the majority of these things happening right now in the Middle East and rippling around the world. This is going to continue across any number of business contexts. We're moving into a world of rogue waves. And that's a rogue wave hitting a military ship off the coast of New Zealand, by the way. These things can sink even the largest ships in a matter of minutes. We've been through these things before, and we've been through these things before in our business context. COVID was a rogue wave, and when you read the after action reports from BCG or McKinsey or Bain or whatever, what they'll say is, hey, this was a black swan. We couldn't have known this was going to happen. The problem is that we had calculated the likelihood of this at about 12.5% in 2020 at HP. This was an investable event. The issue is that most people weren't wanting to pay attention. In fact, 8 of the 10 largest companies in the United States failed to identify pandemics as a strategic risk in 2019 in their annual reports in the United States. The 2 that did, one was CVS Aetna, which is a major health insurer, so they kind of have to, and the second was Apple, which thought, hey, maybe these things are going to jank up our supply chains. What they didn't notice was that these things are actually going to impact almost every aspect of our business. Our retail stores are going to shut at the same time that everyone wants a new notebook computer around the planet. The question is, how can you get smarter? How can you lean into these things? Because there are all kinds of things we can know about the future by just stacking up probabilities. Between 1995 and 2020, 400 million people in China moved into cities, more than the population of the United States, approximately the population of Europe. We saw 16 high-speed rail lines being built around China. So if something happened in Wuhan, the next day it would be in Shanghai. And between 2012 and 2019, we saw a 10 times increase in travel out of China. So what we saw was that China went from an irrelevant tourism spender to the largest tourism spender on Earth. The reason that I bring that up, that last fact, is that if anything happened anywhere in China, the next day it would be anywhere in the world. This was going to happen. And this wasn't just going to happen if it happened in China. It was going to happen if it happened in India. It was going to happen if it happened in Southeast Asia. It was increasingly likely. We're moving into a world of more connectivity, more disruption. And so we are moving into a world of rogue waves. When we talk about these things as companies, we talk about how we are going to be performant, how we're going to be more successful, how we're going to be more reliable. These are the things that analysts like. The thing is that analysts like something that is impossible. Over a 10-year period, 1999 to 2009, only 1 in 469 companies reliably delivered on revenue and net income. This is an impossible task. The question is, how are you going to surf rogue waves? And the first step is understanding the reality here. Right? We've gotten very good in the last 4 years at what's called scientific management. How do we manage financial operations? How do we manage of physical operations, supply chain operations? And we've gotten really good at these things to the point where just a little over a quarter of major disruptions in business value are a result of poor scientific management. The issue is really about external and strategic shocks. About 3/4 of the major decreases in firm value, by which I mean over 20% over a 3-year period, are a result of rogue waves. 3/4. And yet we assume that things will act like normal. In Chinese, there's a word for crisis, and I think it's important because I think it's philosophically why Rogue Waves was a bestseller for months on the Chinese business list, and no one in the US cared. This was my first book. And it's what's called Wei Ji. Wei Ji means crisis in English, but in Chinese, Wei means danger, and Ji means something like the opportunity for growth. In crisis is danger and the opportunity for growth. The question is, which are you going to lean into? Because you don't have a choice. You're going to be in crisis. We need to move from a world where we talk about disruptive innovation. And Nikki, I'm sorry about this. I live in Silicon Valley. I spent time in Silicon Valley. We talk about disruptive innovation all the time. But I think we need to move into a world where we need to think about innovating disruption. How do we innovate these things that we can't control? Because it turns out that disruption is far more monetizable than we can imagine. In fact, between 2001 and 2014, according to a McKinsey Global Institute study, companies that invest in strategic resilience, that invest assuming strategic disruption, have 81% higher economic profits. 81%. So are you going to optimize your firm to make the analysts happy, or are you going to optimize your firm to win? If you have a background in project management, if you have a background in risk management, the first thing you should be saying is, I can't prepare for every rogue wave. I can't prepare for a meteor hitting the earth. I can't prepare for a pandemic. I can't prepare for this. I can't prepare for that. And you're absolutely right. The goal is not to prepare for point risk. The goal is to identify what is the second domino. What is the thing that falls next? What is the thing that falls last? And how do you prepare for that? Because there are a lot fewer issues that can go wrong in your business than issues that can go wrong in the world. You can start with a list of strategic risks. This is the one I came up with. If you talk to Marsh, if you talk to Aon, if you talk to an insurer, if you talk to a risk manager, they'll have a list that looks approximately like this. But what you'll see if you look at risk after risk after risk after risk is that they have a similar shape of impact on your organizations. And that means that you can focus on operational innovations that drive success, even if you don't know what the risk is. The Universa Fund is built on the philosophy of a guy named Nassim Taleb, who came up with the idea of the black swan. And the idea is that there's more non-computable risk than you can imagine, more what they call long tail risk. So the Universa Fund did 3,600% growth when COVID hit, in the month that COVID hit. To give you a sense of scale, if this was a publicly held company, they would have outperformed every company over the previous decade besides Netflix. In a world of disruption, preparing for disruption, as opposed to the main case, is the opportunity. So what can you do about this? How do you think about this? When I was an executive at HP, we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we manage strategic risk. And we looked at a whole range of things. What would happen if there was a land war in Europe? What would happen if there was a pandemic? What would happen if there was an energy shock? What would happen if there was an inflationary shock? And we started taking action on this. And this is interesting, kind of putting on my professor hat, because if you went to business school, there's a thing called case method. And they make you read all of these stories, all of these executive fables about things that have gone wrong. And they all get tied up in a clean little bow because that's how stories work. This is a guy named Carl Icahn. He's an incredibly successful investor over the last 40 years, been a more successful investor than Warren Buffett. And he is an activist investor. He likes to come in, buy 6% of companies, force change in the organization, force lockups, do all kinds of things. He's really good at it. He's not a nice man. My point about this is that as a professor, you end up writing these executive fables called case studies because there isn't a clean A/B example about what would happen if one thing happened versus another. But in this case, what is interesting is that Carl, in his great grace, decided to try and force a lockup between HP and Xerox. Now, if you've ever bought an HP computer, you might think they're a computer company. If you've ever bought HP printer ink, you know where all of the margin is. HP is a printer company that happens to make computers to drive their cash flywheel, but there's no margin in the computers. It is a printer company. So the nearest US peer competitor to HP is Xerox. So we have this really nice A/B comparison between these two companies going into COVID. And so Carl was trying to force a lockup between these two companies, being the kind man that he is. And COVID hit, and something really interesting happened between these two companies that on the surface, right, it's a natural A/B. At HP, what we had done was we'd focused on developing operational innovation against strategic risk for the last 4 years. So we had, for the last 3 years before COVID, we had our entire HR department worldwide working from home, working with notebook computers, working with printers, so on and so forth. We distributed our locations around the world, distributed our teams around the world. So if one office went down, one country went down, the company didn't crash. We distributed our supply chains. We figured out how to have a more direct consumer go-to-market motion. When COVID hit, this had incredible impacts. The first year of COVID, HP had almost no impact on earnings per share, whereas Xerox has dropped 69% and stayed there. My point is that the same company, by making small decisions, can have dramatically different results. In fact, over the source of COVID, HP had all-time highs in margin, unit sales, market share across its printers. This brings me to the story that David Foster Wallace once told about two fish. And one fish turns to the other fish. He says, "Hey, well, it's beautiful today. I'm going to go out and test the waters." Second fish turns to the first fish and says, "What's water?" My point is, we can know a lot about what we're doing in our experience, but most of us miss what is right around us unless we take the time to look outward, unless we take the time to go on tours with Nikki and I to India, to China, to Kiev, to see what's actually going on the ground. Because I guarantee you, no matter what country you're in, whether you're in the UK and it's the Globe, or the US and it's the New York Times, what is going on the ground is not what is going on in the headlines. There are 5 major trends that are going to collide to create the next rogue wave. We know this. Trade war escalation. It does not matter whether Trump is president or not. US and China will continue to engage in trade war escalation. Europe will continue to be in the middle of this, try and split the middle. So will Southeast Asia. India will continue doing what India is doing. That's going to continue getting messy. Global trade deharmonization is a thing that's going to drive to economic uncertainty, as we're seeing right now. We have undercalculated the amount of economic uncertainty we're going to see in the next 6 months. Next step, demographic shift. If you're in Germany, if you're in Italy, you're already seeing structural negative economic growth because of aging populations. We will continue to see that around the world. And the question is, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with decreased economic consumption while having increased social need? And how will we have decreased labor for production in terms of housing, in terms of manufacturing, so on and so forth? Guess what? Humanoid robots is not going to solve this entire problem. It's a structural issue. Defense priorities. God bless our fine president in the United States. I think you get the point. Before Iran, Bloomberg put out a study saying that defense spending was going to go up about 50% between 2025 and 2030, which is a restructuring of the world to a wartime footing. That will only accelerate this year and in the next 5 from that report. When we talk about AI, when we talk about disruption, we talk about the things that are going to happen next, it happens in the context of these shifts. It is going to be a rogue wave. When we talk about AI, I know Nikki brings you to lots of AI people, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to dig deep on this. As what Silicon Valley says, which words we're already in the science fiction future, and we already have Ninja AI robots. That's a 2035 problem. It's not a 2030 problem. It's not a 2025 problem. It will take time for that stuff to scale, but you can see the vision. Where we're at this year is agents are starting to work. 2027, we're going to start to see them working in a meaningful economic commercial way. 2028, 2029, those agents will start working together. There's going to be competitive issues, cybersecurity issues, energy economics issues that may slow all of that down. Going into the 2030s, right now, the U.S. has a strategic foothold in AI. As this AI becomes physical, I strongly believe that China will start to take the lead economically and technologically for 3 reasons. One, the 50% of AI researchers today start their careers in China. The US, being super smart, has decided that it doesn't want those Chinese AI researchers in the US. What we saw historically 3 years ago, AI researchers, 20% or so started their career in the US, and that's down to 12. China's going to win there. Data. As you move into spatial AI, it's about the number of cars. BYD is going to beat Tesla on volume. When you talk about manufacturing data, manufacturing robotics, right? China has more robots in place installed than the US or the entire world combined, for that matter. So that they're going to win on labor, they're going to win on data. And more importantly, they're going to win on cost of energy, their ability to produce energy, their ability to bring nuclear online, solar online, coal online, means that even though they may have 20% less efficient chips than the US, they will still win on volume. So that's kind of the timeline for a lot of this stuff. People like to talk about how much things are going to change, or how quickly they're going to change. I deal with investors. We've got to answer both. So that's kind of my answer to that. Up until a couple of weeks ago, I was a futurist in residence at Amazon. I do a lot of work with companies like Google, and I've been involved in AI since 2000, when professor of mine, Marvin Minsky, who coined the term artificial intelligence with John McCarthy, uh, uh, was my professor. Uh, when I look at technology pipelines over the next 5 years, and I look at price technology curves, what we're seeing is the quality of these tools will increase about 32 times. And when I talk to CIOs, CTOs, and I've talked to well over 1,000 in the past year, what you see is 90% of them think that this number is low, and 10% of them think it's hogwash. So, like you take the bet. I'm taking the conservative bet when I look at what I'm able to compute in terms of how quickly AI is going to improve. I think for the same dollars that you spend today, you're going to get something that's about 32 times better by 2030. That's a massive, massive shift. Let's look at what that means in other modes of performance. Usain Bolt is the fastest man who ever lived, 44.72 kilometers an hour. And I should calculate this in miles per hour. I think it's 27 miles an hour. And he did that for 3.5 seconds. Fastest man in human history. Incredible human being, faster than 8.5 billion of us. Records held up for 10 years. This is as fast as a human can go. Incredible accomplishment if you look at it on that metric. But the thing is that this lard-ass wombat can run 27 miles an hour for about 2.5 minutes. So the question is, what is the baseline upon which you are thinking about human potential with artificial intelligence? Is it Einstein's, or is it Einstein's plus AI? Because if you take Usain Bolt and you put him in technology, you're literally putting him in this rocket ship 32 times faster. He's breaking the sound barrier 365 days a year, 7 days a week, nonstop for the rest of his life. That's what we're doing to your kids. That's what you're doing to your grandma. That's what we're doing to your doctor. That's what we're doing to your absolute dumbest intern. And it's happening incredibly quickly. The metric upon which we measure abstract problem solving is called ARC-AGI. I'm excited by abstract problem solving because this is the thing I think humans are better at than any other creature on the planet. This is that, let's call it that Einstein level shit, where you don't know the problem, you don't have a framework for solving the problem, and you don't know what a solution looks like. And somehow, sometimes your 6-year-old can do this. The thing about AI is that the last couple of years, it's been getting better and better at solving short, abstract problems. Here's where it was in September. Here's where it was in December. It got better than humans at solving abstract problems. And the time window in which it can work is increasing at a logarithmic rate. So what we're going to see, I believe, is that these tools don't just get better than humans or panels of humans. They get better than Einstein's, maybe in the next year or two. So the thing we need to ask is, what does this mean for human potential, human labor? I think not that much. And here is why. Humans are better at abstract problem solving than monkeys, but that doesn't mean we're good at it. Just like it doesn't mean that Usain Bolt is fast. It just means we're better at it than most people or most monkeys. But there are things that we are good at. AI, in many cases, has trouble still making 1 + 1 = 2. And so the question is, how do we bring people and machines together to superpower the things we do in our organizations? When we think about what AI is going to do for our employees, there are three basic things. It's going to dramatically improve executive judgment. Every single person in your organization, every single person that gets access in the next year is going to have a decision maker, decision support that's better than your average McKinsey senior partner, like in their pocket on their iPhone. The second piece is context. And this is a bigger issue in Europe because of your data rights. And I have some opinions on data rights that I've talked to some of you about. I think it's all nonsense. And here's why. Kat's like, the reason is this, that you may have access, you may have data rights, but not sharing those limits the ability of the group. It limits the potential of the group. In the US and my organization, we have a thing called read.ai that records transcripts. Nikki's recording this darn thing. He's sucking down my brain so that you all can have it in the future for his AI brain. My point is, in the next year, these tools are going to make it so that every person in every organization can have context about the decision they're making. What does it mean for the rest of the organization? What does it mean for the people? What does it mean for your customers? As opposed to, are they just hitting their KPI that someone came up with at random, like their key performance indicator? Like, we're going to shift the way we work as organizations. And the last piece is about simulation. Right. So the reason that we all get to be here on a Monday morning instead of at the office is because we got pretty good at abstract problem solving. Yeah, we do need to focus on massive retraining. We can talk about that, Kat, and the post. Abstract problem solving. And we got good at scenario planning. We basically figured out how to decrease risk. It's what we call common sense. But what we're really doing is we're simulating the range of what is possible in our minds. AI is going to dramatically and rapidly get better at that than humans. It's part of that 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2 thing. It's a probabilistic thinking. It's going to help us think much more broadly. So the question we need to think about as managers, as owners, as leaders, is what does it mean to have tools, to have people who are 32 times smarter than Einstein? How do we manage them in our organizations? Now, I know that we've talked, Nikki, you've talked about vibe coding with this crew? No? Okay. So the big thing that's happening in AI is AI is starting to write software to solve its problems. And so here's an example. It's just a friend of mine who's wanted a new website for her company. So he spent 15 minutes writing down what we wanted the website to do. 2.5 minutes later, there's the website. 8 hours, I could have jacked in all the back-end software, so on and so forth, had a functional website for her. My point is, this is no longer a 6 to 8 week project that requires teams. It is something that your mom can do. And these are things that are going to become dramatically diffused in the next couple of years, as every single human starts to use AI to write code to solve their problems. About 14 months ago now, Sam Altman said something that sounded a little crazy. He said, I think there's going to be $1 billion one-person company. And the thing is that $1 billion one-person company already exists. It's called MedV. So this is a guy who used vibe coding to make a website. And this website sells GLP-1 drugs, weight loss injection drugs. And he doesn't have doctors, he doesn't have lawyers, he doesn't have the ability to distribute the drugs, he doesn't have a compounder. He's just a marketing tool. His website, all generated by AI, did $400 million of sales in the last 12 months. How many employees do you think he has? At $400 million, he thought he should hire his brother. My point is, there's a lot of problems with this company. I'm not bought into its longevity. But the idea that one person can generate a $400 million business in 12 months is now possible. Valuation when it did a raise was 1.8 billion. I think there's a problem, like I said, with the longevity of the company, which is driving down the PE of the firm. But when we were in Shenzhen a couple of weeks ago, when Nikki and the crew were in Shenzhen a couple of weeks ago, we saw people using agentic tools, the next generation of these type of tools at scale in coffee shops and places like this, teaching each other how to do it. While this might sound like the science fiction future, it is only the science fiction future in your town. This is happening at scale. It's happening for billions of people. It's happening right now. It will change the world in the next 12 months. This is the next rogue wave.